thanks to the coronavirus, for some great systemic change, we're starting to see businesses that are purely focused on profit really struggling through this period. That is not the business model of the future.
Hi Heidi, how are you?
Just about getting through continual Zooms.
Oh yeah, how's Zoom fatigue treating you? How have you dealt with it in lockdown?
I read somewhere the smart thing to do is make your half an hour meetings 25 minutes and your hour ones 50 minutes. So you get a 5-minute break or a 10-minute break in between. So you can actually do a few emails or something. Otherwise, I'm literally just from 9:30 till 2:15 back to back with Zoom calls.
We connected over my LinkedIn post, what was it, a couple of weeks ago? And I was discussing the difference between and the imbalance of purpose and impact, and the fact that purpose, because it's become so popular and popularized specifically amongst consumers, that a lot of businesses decide to attach themselves to a purpose as a marketing decision instead of having an actual impact and a reason for existing, which trickles down and influences every single facet of the business. We had quite a nice little exchange on LinkedIn and then on messages, and we realized there's so much overlap and we believe the same things.
I was like, I'm sure Toby's like just repeating back to me everything that I say. It's like, yeah, it's like imagine like similar thinking really in terms of, you know, your thought process and mine. It was like even how you describe the purposing and how it's not really linked to impact. I was like, yeah, that could have been like, I could have written that.
I feel lucky and privileged to be able to have conversations with people like you. You've got such a vast amount of experience that led you to this point. What I'm really interested in doing in this conversation, if that's okay with you, is really understanding the journey that got you to this point, everything you've learned, the outlooks, the opinions you have as a result, what's shaped the worldview to get you to this point. For the past 20 years, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 decades, you've helped over 2,100 social enterprises. And what's interesting about that is that ranges from startups, kind of upstarts, right through to corporations. And what you've been doing for all of these businesses, whatever the size, is you've been helping them more accurately measure the tangible impact that they're having on the world and society and people on the planet. And I want to dive into that. And I want to dive into what you're doing now and specifically how you feel around the MBE title. But instead of diving straight into that, I really am interested to understand how you started and what got you to this point. So what point in your life, Heidi, did you realize that making an impact was important to you and was an integral part of your values?
So I think if we go back around 20 years ago, at that point I didn't really know what I wanted to do as a career, and I decided, because I was good at maths, that I should train to be a chartered accountant, which now I know that you don't need to be good at maths to be an accountant. So that was a completely illogical choice if I reflect back on it. But my first job, so to speak, was at PricewaterhouseCoopers in the corporation tax department, and effectively working with multinationals, saving them millions of pounds of tax by doing some great tax planning, all legit and legal, but it sort of struck a nerve in that it's actually, well, they could really actually afford to pay their tax. It's the small ones that can't afford to pay their tax that we should really be helping to do this kind of stuff if we were going to do it. So at that point, that's when, you know, my values started to kick in around, actually this doesn't really light me up in the way that I thought it would. You know, I thought it was going to be exciting, you know, international travel, this stuff, which still lights me up in, you know, in terms of traveling internationally. But and in parallel to that, I was helping to set up a charity, a local charity for young people. And so I was learning what was involved in a charity, how you set one up, how you go about bid writing and different things. And a few years later, I decided actually I could blend the two of them together. And that's where the social enterprise accountancy firm came from, in that it was going to be an accountancy firm that specialized in working with charities and social enterprises, because I just loved them. By then, I think I'd set up 2 or 3 social enterprises at that point, and it meant that I could still use my skill set that I trained for years to develop, but very much using it with organizations that were doing something purposeful.
I love that, because something that I think about a lot is the idea of passion and purpose. So when you are in a position to combine what you're good at, your skill set, i.e., accountancy and maths, even though it's not directly relevant, with actual purpose, so you can utilize what you're good at and your skill set and your talent with something that creates greater good and a positive change. That's when the ultimate fulfillment comes through. And my theory, and what's really led me to have these kind of conversations, is that when you combine those two, that leads you onto a path of actually creating an indelible positive impact in the world. So take it back a little bit more. You said it was around 2-3 years from the moment you realized that actually this didn't really sit well with your values to the moment you took action. What did that in between part look like? Was there internal angst? Did you just kind of suppress it emotionally, or did it manifest in different ways? Because what I find interesting is that there will be a lot of people, especially with the introspection that's come from lockdown, who would be in that same mindset. What was your mindset at the time, and what led you to making that jump into the social enterprise accountancy firm?
Through working with part-time for one of the social enterprises, that's where I learned more about social enterprises, and came up with, actually I could set up my own social enterprise rather than being involved in helping other social enterprises to run. I could have my own. But if I look back in terms of a point at which I should have or would have made a decision, I think I should have made it earlier, because it definitely affected my health. I wasn't a very healthy person. I was actually quite miserable most of the time. I didn't really enjoy what I was doing. In fact, I hated it. So um, I think when you're out of line with what kind of sets you on fire and what you believe in terms of your values, it's very difficult to be excited and happy about it. It just got to the point where I was like, is this what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? Is this the way my life's going to go? And it wasn't just work related. It is you kind of review everything in your life, don't you? And you're kind of like, yeah, shit, this is not the plan that I had for where I was going to be. One of the things that I suppose I've developed is this, I don't want to call it a belief, but this thinking that every few years we need to completely reinvent ourselves. Which sounds bizarre. So I've gone from an accountant that's an employee, realized I'm a really terrible employee because I don't like being told what to do. I have all these ideas. I'm helping to set up charities and designing projects and programs for them, and being entrepreneurial. And then I'm sat at a computer doing stuff where no opinion is required, and it's quite hard to say, well, you know what, when can I be me, when can I be really me, as opposed to the person that you've employed that you think is just inside this box. And at some point I just was like, can't do it anymore. I this and I think I just had this momentary madness where I was like, I can set up a social enterprise accountancy firm, and it went from there.
I really like that belief in terms of you need to reinvent yourself every few years. And it almost takes guts to do that. But once you do it for the first time or the second time, you do realize the merit in it. Because at the end of the day, another way to look at that is just growth and evolution. And something I believe in, I believe the same thing as you. And adding to that, if you start from a place of wanting to combine what you're good at with something that makes a difference in the world, and you use that as a guiding principle for your ongoing evolution, then that is only a good thing.
if you're spending most of your time unhappy or miserable, it's like, well, change. It's that thing about, you're not a tree, you're not rooted. If you hate your job, find something that you love doing. You know, it's not difficult in some respects, but then it's terrifying because you're like, oh, I've got rid of my financial cushion that was padding me and keeping me protected. But part of that is then it becomes a motivator to make the whatever you want to do work.
And I just want to stick on this a little bit more from when you actually decided to move and set up your own thing. You got the head and the heart saying two different things. How did you navigate that from the rational side of your brain saying, no, you need to stay in, it's stable, got that financial cushion, to your heart saying, I need to get out of this and I need to be doing something that's more truer to myself? What in that particular moment, how did you navigate through that?
So I was probably a bit of a boring geek in that I was like, I'm going to research whether this is like viable in terms of a viable business idea, and that sort of gave me the safety that actually, yeah, this could be viable, because back then you just had normal accountancy firms would have perhaps one person that specialized in charities, and there wasn't really any social enterprise accountancy. So by sort of exploring that, I kind of saw that actually there was a gap in the market, and it could quite easily be exploited, rather than just sort of coming up with one of my other thousand random ideas and saying, oh well, I'll just go with it. Yeah, I'm not completely crazy normally.
You're grounded with the right amount of rationalism. You need to be a little bit crazy though.
Yeah, you need to make it so that you can't go back, I think, but you've also got to go forward with a sense of actually this is doable and achievable.
What got you interested in social enterprise initially? You said your initial work was with a charity, right? What got you interested in social enterprise back then? What was the landscape of social entrepreneurship when you started?
There wasn't a huge landscape, but for the charity, they were looking at generating trading income and getting contracts, as well as obviously getting grants and funding. And then when I started working part-time for a social enterprise, that's when I started to learn a lot more about what a social enterprise was, and really kind of figure out that actually this is probably going to be the future of business. And it was more forward thinking to have a product or service you could sell than to look to a funder and try to fit into their criteria and be shifted off mission completely and end up, you design a program that's going to achieve what you want it to, and they chop it and cut bits out of it, and it ends up with, it's a pizza without any topping.
So, as a social enterprise accountancy firm, and now connecting the dots, you specialize in helping social enterprises track their impact, the positive impact. So, it's not just the profit, but the impact as well. Where did that shift happen from you as a social enterprise accountancy firm, for lack of a better term, excuse my lack of knowledge in the accountancy field, tracking revenues and tracking commercial growth? Where did that tipping point and shift happen to tracking impact? What was that aha moment?
It started around about 15 years ago. Is that right? No, 15? No, 10 years ago. Because back then, the two main methods for tracking impact were social accounting and audit, and social return on investment, which the language is accountancy. um, so people that wanted that done would ask about it, and I was like, what is this thing they're asking about, about social audit? And so I looked it up, and I was like, oh, this looks quite interesting. And so I did the training in social accounting and audit, and I did the social return investment training, and decided actually that I really like doing that. So it became a small part of the accountancy business up until 4 years ago, when I got rid of the accountancy bit completely to focus purely on the impact side.
our collective vision, sure, there's semantics and different ways of saying it, for every single business and company on the planet to be a social enterprise, and as a result to measure their success as an organization, not based on the value that they provide to their stakeholders and shareholders, but the positive value they make on the planet and society. But unfortunately, a lot of businesses view impact as a tick box. Can you tell any stories of how focusing on impact has actually had a positive impact on the bottom line as well? Because I think in order to create that mass change in the shorter term, those stories need to come to the forefront so decision makers can actually understand this isn't a tick box. This does actually have a positive impact on your bottom line and revenues and commercial success, as well as doing right by the planet. Do you have any stories to bring that idea to life?
There's loads, but if you think about all of the corporates that do their purpose from a PR and marketing perspective, they do it because they know it will impact their bottom line. That is fundamentally why their comms turns to focusing on purpose, because they know that if they look like they're doing something good for people and the environment, more people will buy from them because they will be seen more favorably. So if you look at it from that perspective, that's why people do the purpose washing and do this PR stuff. But if you think from on a more genuine level of doing it's actually something that is in the design and the creation of the organization, in that it actually enables you to create a, an organization or business that has employees that believe in your purpose. They're more likely to stay. um, they're more likely to be committed to the organization, so you don't have the recruitment costs of replacing an employee, which in the UK I think they say is around £26,000 every time an employee leaves. Going through the recruitment process, training them and getting them up to speed of the previous person costs you that much. So from that perspective, if you've got employees that are committed because you are genuine about your purpose, you've already saved yourself thousands in terms of trying to get new employees. You've also got products and services that are better aligned to your customers because they're focused on creating a positive impact for them, as opposed to they're focused on how can we create the cheapest product and make the most profit. You've also thought about, well, actually it would make sense to make this part of the product more durable so people don't have to replace it every year. Thinking of a certain phone that stops functioning every 12 to 18 months or goes really slow. If they were to use more durable parts in their phones, people wouldn't have to replace them so often, which would have less impact on the environment because we wouldn't have to mine for all the bits that go in the phones. And so there are loads of examples. And you've also then, on the other kind of angle, you've got investors that are becoming more conscious about where they're investing their money, and they're looking not just for financial returns but also the social returns. So there's huge things that come from being able to know that you're impact led in terms of how you operate.
I and Bright Shift Regard talk about it as conscious or compassionate capitalism, and you talk about it as just every business being social enterprise. This is a very difficult question, um, and I'm not looking for a roadmap or getting there. But what needs to happen for compassionate capitalism to become the norm, in your opinion?
I think people need to be more aware of what they're buying, but I don't think we can say that it's a responsibility of the consumer. I believe that we need businesses to step up and say, actually, we don't want to have modern slavery in our supply chains. We don't want to be chopping down trees. We actually, the pressure needs to be on them. And that's where I think it's perhaps through legislation and different things to kind of get rid of some of those bad practices. But the big issue there is, how do you have global legislation because when you're looking at the big businesses, their supply chains aren't local, they're global, and what they can get away with in one country but can't in another just means they shift their production. So I think there's a mix of things. It's individuals making better choices, but having the information to make those choices, businesses recognizing that it's not just about money and they need to be better in terms of how they behave, and governments, while they still exist, doing better in terms of policy and legislation.
I want to ask you what your advice would be to the following people. So first of all, a first-time founder who is about to set up his or her first organization and who deeply cares about making an impact but is unsure where to start. What advice would you give that person?
Make sure you've got something you can sell. It's great that you want to make an impact, but if you can't make any money, you can't make any impact. So make sure you have a product or service that can be sold. So know who that customer is. And I don't mean create some very, very specific customer avatar where, they read Cosmo on the weekend and drink I don't know, Chardonnay or bottles of champagne. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, know who your customer is. Is it the end user in terms of a person, or is there like an agency or organization or public sector body that's kind of the middleman that will pay for that? And make sure that they will pay and not expect it to be free, because we need money to make impacts ultimately.
In our old office before COVID happened, on a whiteboard we had the profit and then impact, and then just arrows to each one, because you need both, and they're self-sustaining. It's like a seesaw, isn't it? So you need the profit to then grow the business so you can grow your market share, get your product or service out to more people, and as virtue of that, the impact you have as an organization with impact at its core can also scale as well. So you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Second person to give advice to, this is pretty much a free consultation, isn't it? A decision maker in an SMB who wants to make the shift, wants to do it authentically, but is unsure on how to do it in the best way possible.
If that decision maker is pretty much to have that conversation with the rest of the senior management team, if there are then board members above that senior management team, to bring them in on those conversations, to make sure that everyone is committed and bought into it, because if they're not, then it will fail.
Okay. And I've got another question which kind of links, but I've had lots of decisions. I've got lots of friends as well, people in my network who are very much in this position. But instead of a decision maker, just an employee who wants to convince their seniors and wants to convince the board to invest more into impact. What advice would you give there? What can they do within their organization in order to get the decision makers to take it more seriously?
Send them on some training. So think about how impacts their job, so to speak. This probably sounds a bit daft. Impacts your job, but start to think about your job role from the perspective of you're not delivering activities or doing things, but you're creating impact. And by looking at your job role in that way, see where you are perhaps able to create more impact if you do things in a different way, and use that to evidence and prove that actually by having an impact head as opposed to a normal profit focused head, you can deliver better and more effectively for the organization, and then take that proof to more senior people.
Last question, because I will let you go. But based on all the amazing work that you're doing at the moment, what are you most excited about?
Oh my God, there's about 20 things I'm excited about right now.
That's the right answer. Give me the top three.
So I don't know where to start. My second book is coming out soon, so I'm really excited about finishing that off, because it's been kind of hanging over me for a long time. I'm really excited about the research around women scaling social enterprises, because I've got some great stuff that will hopefully come out of that. There's just loads. My podcast interviews, I'm really loving the people I'm interviewing. I'm loving all of the work that I'm doing, my one-to-one mentoring and different stuff. Yeah, there's just tons of stuff. And I think more on a system level, I'm really excited to see the number of people that are setting up social enterprises, and the amazing, what I would call, innovations that people are coming up with in terms of the ideas for their social enterprises. We're not talking about people that are not to be mean to anybody that's doing this. We're not talking about people that are making bags from fabric anymore. We're talking about people that are making sure that the source of that fabric is from a sustainable place in India or somewhere in the continent of Africa, and making sure every line of their supply chain ticks a box in terms of impact and being positive for the environment. So people are becoming much more detailed in how they're approaching it. So it's really, really interesting to see the huge opportunities that are there.
I'm going to take that back. I've got one more question. Social entrepreneurship has been integral to you for the past 2 decades. Because you're someone who's been part of it for 20 years, what has it been like witnessing the growth of social entrepreneurship? And what are your predictions for the future?
I think when you're in it, you don't really notice it.
Echo chamber as well, isn't it? So it's hard to actually get your handle on things.
Yeah, sometimes you can be a bit insular. So I think that came at the beginning of the COVID crisis, in that all this support was going to charities and social enterprises weren't getting any, and I was in this sort of little bubble. I don't want to use that in a COVID context, but I was in this social enterprise bubble where I thought, the most of the world knew what a social enterprise was. Politicians knew what it was. Everyone thought they were great and they were kind of the future. And then that bubble got burst at the beginning of COVID, because no, the politicians didn't know what they were. They didn't care, etc. So yeah, it can be quite weird in that you think that it's bigger than what it really is. But I do think, on a more general level, people do want to set up social enterprises more now than what I've ever seen previously. And my vision for the future and what I believe will happen is that all businesses will be social enterprises. I did say by 2020, or else they would start to see that they would fail. And I think, thanks to the coronavirus, for some great systemic change, we're starting to see businesses that are purely focused on profit really struggling through this period. And I don't, no awfulness meant to anybody that works for them, but that is not the business model of the future.
That is a brilliant way to end it. Heidi, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this.
It's been really nice talking to you.